Hello, everyone. Today is the 7th of August, very hot day, but we're here in sunny Korea. And I'm Professor Mark Whitaker, and I'm introducing Michel Bauwens, who is our visiting scholar. I'm hosting him per se, and we've had a previous talk on the 5th, and we're showing this live as well as recording this for posterity or future interest as well. But I will begin today's talk, and that talk, the wrong laptop here, that talk will be called A Call to Change, Circular Economy, P2P, and the Historical Circularity of the Commons. And I'll first talk about 25 minutes about circular economy, what is that, and how my project of the circular economy is very close to exactly what Michel is talking about as cosmo-localism, the idea of how digital technologies don't erase geographic space, but potentially facilitate these communities around the world in this kind of developmental model. Let me open this. So first I'll introduce a bit about this project today. My talk is about an online platform for the circular economy that's basically cobbled together with lots of different ideas. But it's the idea that you could use digital technologies to facilitate a real geographic community instead of use it to escape a geographic community. And table of contents today, a bit about myself first and the project overview, the scope of this project, the level of operation impacts to communities, how people can support initiatives like this, as well as how best to provide feedback to me, and a bit of biography for those who don't know me, potentially who've come across this video later. I'm a PhD of sociology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, interested in environmental sociology, which is the interaction of environment, technology, and society, involved in undergraduate, graduate curriculum development for this department, about mobile revolution in development, mobile networks and how that changed development, as well as graduate level discussions of disaster risk reduction as well. I'm the author of 3 books so far, one Toward a Bioregional State, which was from 2005, another one from 2009 dealing with world history of environmental problems over thousands of years called Ecological Revolution, and recently published just, well, in 1 month from now by Springer, a book about the Korean wave in a post-pandemic world, in a more digital world, subtitled BTS, Cosmax, and Squid Game. And that my co-author is a Korean professor at Kyung University that's known from Joe and I, Shin Kyung-Chao, from Chao's police, right? But anyway, also under contract, what we're talking about today is a circular economy, and my book is already under contract for May of 2024, and that will be called Relinking Eden, the Best Material and Organizational Choices to Accelerate Circular Economy. And that, the book proposal came from Springer. Here's all my co-authors that will be part of this book as part of my research team. You might recognize some of these people already, but the title, that's where I get the title. But anyway, that's dealing with the past research I've had, the U.S. National Science Foundation, Korean National Research Foundation in 2013, as well as recently on the circular economy. I just completed 3 years doing that research, and this book will summarize what we've learned about the circular economy during that period. Anyway, also my background about the NRF grant and the circular economy, which is the topic of today. The grant paid for the large research team, and it comes with my ideas of 130 categories of sustainable materials. And it looks like that. You might have seen the commodity wheel in my office, and here's a list, if you want to pass that around, of all of the 130 different social uses of materials. And my research team was organizing all of this together with me, presented this idea also at the United Nations, and from 2018, the United Nations facilitated popularization of this on their academic impact websites. And I'm the only one mentioned for SDG 12 that has a special page exclusively about, my project here at the UN itself, which was nice of them to do. From 2019, that's when I got the grants. During that time, actually, Dr. Cavaway, who's here on the team, we went to the United Nations. We also went to the Asian Development Bank, facilitated by him. Thank you. And recently, this past summer, we've had the World Bank visit us here because they have a Sangha office and got their advice on how it might be rolled out as well. But anyway, this is just a picture of some of the widely diverse team that I have. You might have recognized some of these students or not. But the point is, that's just the first year that I hired. And 2 doctorates at the end of the last year, not even part of our school. One from Seoul National University, Baria Briani, and another person who's a PhD in international finance, Rajiv, down here. But anyway, my wider advisory team, some of them are here, thank you, Joe, dealing with outreach and strategic partnerships. I don't have time to talk about all this, but I just want to show it's not just me, but there's a lot of people who've been interested in organizing and helping me in this project. But anyway, today, the overview of this, if you remember this one slide, you can remember everything. There's 3 images here. One is a cell phone but they're all related to the cell phone. One has the Sustainable Development Goals as buttons, so fits really well, I think, how you can use mobile networks to facilitate Sustainable Development Goals. Also, the commodity wheel that I showed you of 130 categories is on the same platform, and a map of ecoregions. And ecoregions are specific zones of the world with their own local flora, fauna, microclimate. So my argument is, if you're interested in facilitating sustainability globally, you need to know something about specific regions of the world. And so those 3 metrics work together in this project. And that's the wheel that's on this phone right here. That's what I've already shown you, the larger version of that. Anyway, this is partially in Korean too for some. But anyway, Commodity Ecology Mobile Project, the innovative mobile accessible platform to efficiently manage the world's commodities that reach the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Gives you instant access around the world because of mobile networks. It gives you a global reach because it also gives you an eco-regional reach. And I'll describe later and show you how mobile phone networks, many telecommunications technologies have a digital divide, but increasingly mobile phones have what I call a digital parity. There's a lot of equality of scale of mobile phones around the world. And so, yes, you could use mobile phone networks in all of these ecoregions around the world to facilitate discussing the exact same project and rubric. So you can not compare apples and oranges, but you compare everybody classifying sustainable materials and how they link to each other in the same project globally. And of course, when you're laterally learning people, you could look at how another region of the world is really learning how to do that. Maybe those particular links may facilitate it in your own region. But anyway, it's affordable because it's based on mobile phones. There's probably over 5 billion mobile phones. A few years ago, it was about 2.5 to 3.3 billion smartphones. And smartphones, of course, are the machines that will be the network that connects to this platform. And that's how it becomes an effective sustainable materials and consumptive management platform. But anyway, of course, I am the chief designer and research head, Mark Whitaker, and in SUNY Korea. But for longer than that, I've been working on this idea of affordable platform that allows people to use mobile phones to manage resources vital to their livelihood and environment, called the Commodity Ecology Mobile Platform, or CEM for short. And what does commodity ecology mean? That's just my term for the most complete example of a circular economy yet, with 130 categories. And but what is a circular economy? As we'll see, there's many definitions of that. But a quick definition that I have is you need to have it as complete as possible of a circular economy, with many different discrete categories in which to have a planning document instead of just a recommendation of behavior. Other points, the circular economy is key to making better material choices and better waste management, since it identifies how useful recycled wastes go back into profitable production in another material category. As a result, environmental pollution is also decreased in that dynamic. And the CEM platform brings together all ecoregions through the mobile phone network. This allows all regions to effectively exchange information on sustainable materials and waste management in a quick, easy, efficient, and affordable way. And ecoregions, as I said, what are those? This is a geographical regions characterized by specific ecological patterns, including soil, health, flora, fauna, climatic conditions that are unique to those particular zones. But anyway, what is the circular economy for most people? That's my short definition. It's quite a blurry concept originally. It's one among 4 concepts, though, which, that'll give it, one among 4 concepts supported for sustainable development ideas. And of course, we've heard that term sustainable development coined in the 1980s in the Brundtland Report, Our Common Future. The idea of smart cities developing into the 1990s when ICT was a bit more scarce and seen as localized. the green economy or green growth concepts as well, and also the circular economy, though is argued recently to be one with the most traction these days. And also I will say, because ICT is no longer scarce, we have what's called smart regions. And the smart regions mean no longer do we need to only think about ICT development in particular cities and sustainable relationships, but whole regions now have the capacity through virtual communications to have their own capacity for making themselves smarter, per se. But anyway, plus the sustainable development model that I'm talking about is argued to have even more traction, as CEM is a more actionable way to operationalize a circular economy of sustainable development for businesses, consumers, and citizens alike. Yet the concept is very blurry, as I said, losing out from lack of clarity. We hope it doesn't become just an empty buzzword. There's a really good example of this. Julian Kircher and his team from 2017, they researched 114 different definitions that are currently being used for the circular economy. They found very little overlap, but what they did find was conceptual overlap, and that's what I will talk about. So they feared that the growing buzzword quality of the circular economy will make people jettison the whole concept. So from 114 different CE, circular economy definitions, that team worked hard and found they found 17 points of importance. Quite a big, but then they reduced those to 5 core principles they found. On the other hand, I think to solve this problem with the circular economy, my platform is very distinct and designed to end this blurriness because it's more holistic. It includes all 5 of these. It includes even 3 more core principles that I think will facilitate the circular economy. So by reflecting on all this, I think I can add more enablers with this digital platform and its capacities, and even adding 3 fresh core principles of how a circular economy may work to be facilitated. I'll talk about that. But first, I want to show Kircher's research, help you understand what a circular economy is. There are 17 points with 5 core principles. The first core principle here is what you've probably heard, the 4 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle, refurbish. But that's behavior. That's one thing that's typically mentioned in most definitions. And second core principle is a waste hierarchy. What they mean by that is which of those 4 R's is more important than the others. Is this a system that will refurbish? Is this a system that's going to keep producing things but only recycle and constantly keep the throughput? Or is it more interested in reuse or something? So typically different systems have some priority they found. Number 3 core principle is a systems perspective, more holistic. It needs to have sort of micro level, human behavior, organizational activities, mesosystems or macro systems of how the larger political economy can facilitate or block a circular economy. The 4th thing is most definitions include enablers, but Kircher and others, they found only 2 enablers, and that's just they relied mostly on meso level, business models or macro, aggregate consumer support. And I have a lot more enablers that will help this project too. Number 5, typically circular economy is always something that relates to sustainable development, but surprisingly, not all definitions even mention the environment in most. I'll show you the statistics that they have. It's really quite weird. But everything from environmental quality, economic prosperity, social equity, or future generations are typically mentioned in definitions of a circular economy. And if you total all those numbers, you get 17. And however, they said, most people do not know what this means, and they just make up their own definitions because there's 114 different definitions. 73% of those were invented only between 2012 and 2017. And that means 95 different definitions in 114 different examples they found. Only 3 of those had any small shared use, mostly from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, shared 14 times, and just 2 others shared 1 each. Thus, 95 different definitions. That's why it's a very blurry category, why I think Kircher did a good job of trying to formalize what are the 5 core principles. But with no consensus developing, the team did find those 5 core principles as kind of a consensus across many different definitions. And I will have 5 more enablers than just business plans or consumers to show you, and 3 more core principles to show you in just a moment too. I'll show all those in just a bit. But anyway, after my review of the platform next, we'll compare these 5 core principles back to how I have 8 more things that will help facilitate the circular economy. Anyway, how the mobile platform works. Anyway, there's 3 things that I showed you earlier here, and We have the mobile phones as a network, not just one, but over 5 billion mobile phones, 3.3 billion smartphones, and that's 4 years ago. So probably more than that by now, rather equally distributed around the world. Equally distributed around the world, though, in different regions. Even sub-Saharan Africa from 2019, according to data from Hootsuite, had 53% of per capita use of ownership or access to smartphones. So even that was the lowest. So from 2019, there are no regions in the world below 50% use or capacity of access to smartphones. Of course, things are different, like electricity or basic freedom. They're different, but the point is the infrastructure is there. So that's a positive aspect. So linking those two things together, you can reach all specific regions with local knowledge, have the people involved, and they can share data with each other from different regions on the same rubric. And there's the same rubric. So in each of these regions, there's a synergy developing, between these three. And that reaches all material uses using the same framework of commodity ecology in all regions. Anyway, the platform users, what can they do? They can classify themselves in two ways at the beginning. You can post as a producer or as a complaining or desiring consumer in all regions. And that means about anything, about current sustainable materials available, they could sell, they could request, they could complain. It's a community about the material environment. Also, they could post about future goals, like we don't have this yet. So it's a place for envisioning the future of a particular region and not just complaining about the past. Also, you could post about tradable wastes per category. There's a way to post and choose that you're actually highlighting a waste that you don't know what to do with. And hopefully somebody could pick that up and coordinate it instead of leaving it into the air, the soil, and the water. And users can view and communicate on all projects across all regions, but you can only post in your own home region to avoid spamming from different zones. I imagine Korean spamming Japanese spamming. But the point is, it's designed to facilitate a particular geographic community, but you can learn from all communities in this way. And how is that done? How do you keep people? You register to a particular region, and I'll show how that works in a moment. But anyway, the prototype is here at commodity Coicosity, azurewebsites.net, and the homepage is that ecoregional map. And as you can see in this screen capture, I'm logged in as in Whitaker, and here's our button here on South Korea. And that means I've registered, and the website has recognized me as coming from a particular location. The devil's in the details, you can spam and get VPNs, but generally, you're classified where you log in, and that's recognized on the platform already. This is the digital version of the commodity wheel that I showed earlier, and that is clickable as well. In each of those regions, there's the same commodity ecology wheel of 130 material uses for ongoing posting and debate and business incubation. And I'll show you 3 images here together. So when users click on any ecoregion, this is a clickable map as well, they see the same view of 130 material categories, but with unique information for each region. And that makes it easy to manage sustainable materials and consumption for that quick and efficient way. Also, this wheel, of course, is different in each zone. When you click on that wheel, you get a thread of a particular ongoing comment, like a newspaper section of everything about textiles, dyes and colorants, building materials, superconductors, 130 categories. Well, please pass Given the list of 130 if you haven't seen that. Thank you. So those come together, and every region will have their own local conversation, but they can learn from other groups of how those networks of material flows matter. Anyway, to conclude the review, the instant access you have as of 2019, that's a total network of 5 billion people with mobile phones or more, and that's a very cheap and effective way for communication. Also, the platform reaches 867 different ecoregions. There's a debate of exactly how many there are, but the current platform is using a map 867. And as I said, ecoregions are those regions characterized by specific ecological patterns, including soil, health, flora, fauna, climatic conditions. If you're interested in sustainability, you better know something about a regional. Otherwise, some universal idea of sustainability won't always match very well in a particular ecoregional dynamic. And here's the map I thought Dr. Brown would be interested in. The lowest number here from 2019, mobile connectivity by region, number of mobile connections compared to total population. Middle Africa is the lowest, 53%. This is the revolutionary slide. I mean, this is really changing the way we're going to communicate. If this continues, if we continue to live in a mobile phone civilization, it will be greater and greater possibilities of having these lateral communications on common projects like this. And that's what Michel Bauwens calls cosmo-localism, right? Sort of like that. Anyway, the third point here, the commodity wheel is a commonly shared thing across the entire world. It makes the platform the world's only archive of all sustainable materials, timestamped, regionalized. You can post in particular regions or globally at the same time. And there's a global wheel on the platform as well for like the front page of the newspaper, where you could see the activity of the whole planet and what's happening as well. But anyway, back to Kershire. How is this project different from his 5 main points? And I think in my commodity ecology, there's 25 points, not just 17, and 8 core principles. It's the same ones originally, but the arrow shows where the commodity ecology is a more holistic and better circular economy than many lackluster and partial. And when I say partial, let's look at this for a moment. If you notice where the arrows are, this is the full sample, and the full sample of 114 definitions, only like 30% talked about a waste hierarchy. Only half of them talked about reduce. Most of them were talking about reuse and recycle and recover. But if you notice, very few of them even had addressing any who will do things. Like only 19% of the full sample talked about what individuals could do in a circular economy. Only 21% said how organizations might facilitate it, which is really quite bad if you think about it. Other points here. It's not working. Okay. Additional core principle that I have is a specific geography. I don't think you can have a project without a specific geography. So I think instead of just an abstract idea of a circular economy, the ecoregional map allows us to create a circular economy with its specific boundaries, as well as globally at the same time. And the ecoregions, I think, was a missing link in a systems perspective that fits right there. Also, additional core principle I have, that list of 130 categories. That's unique to this project. You know, we're being very discreet about what a circular economy means. It means, how do we link these things together? It's a debate. It's a checklist. For think what to do. Additionally, we have aims. If you notice the aims here, the full sample, only of 114 definitions, only 13% said anything about sustainable development, which is really quite shocking. You know, these are very low numbers for a circular economy. So most people who invented their own definition don't even discuss ecological concerns, as you can see from these. Future generations would just mention like 1%. My project is all about posterity. So it's all about the future generations as well. Anyway, enablers. You know, some people don't even mention enablers. It's 11 or 19% of the whole sample. But I have additional enablers, I said, citizens, not just consumers, but citizens. What do they want in particular regions, their future dreams, complaints, deliberations. Also, additional enabler, environmental underclasses. Environmental underclasses means the people that are experiencing the worst environment. In the United States, it's called environmental racism, but it's not always coded on race. It could be coded on an ethnic minority in one country, but it could be a religious minority in another country. It could be coded on old occupational issues. Like it's Pakistanis have a Christian minority near the Delta. Indians would have an underclass of Islamic population. So that kind of dynamic. Rohingya is a good example of an environmental underclass. So this facilitates environmental underclasses to have more enfranchisement of their problems. Anyway, additional enabler, ICT for ST, ICT for sustainable development. This means mobile networks and platforms. So it's really part of the definition for me of a circular economy. It needs these digital tools. And additional issue, material specifics, and the online encyclopedia is a database per ecoregion. And also business-to-business smart contracts, ways to facilitate those kind of dynamics will be built into the platform in later future iterations. So all those things dealing with waste trading, business incubation, sales, could be facilitated on this platform as well. The last core principle, I think we'll talk about this in a few slides in a moment. 3 kinds of material links, 4 kinds of organizational motifs. When I look at 3 years of research with my team, I think there's 3 kinds of links that facilitate a circular economy. In the months and years to come, we're on a mission to build this platform as an organization. We're looking for more funding sources, more strategic partnerships. So if you ever find anyone interested in a cosmo-local project for a circular economy, let me know. But anyway, near future, we'll add analytics and big data once the platform is up and running with more users as well. And we have a technical and social completion plan and a budget as well. And very slow. The idea project completion will pollinate the use of this platform. Training ideally will occur in at least 1 country in each of the world's 14 different cultural zones. And this is another interesting map of modern world system cultural zones by 2 geographers who wrote a book called The Myth of Continents, where they said the real pieces of our modern world system are these 14 zones. So I thought, why not go to 1 country in each of these and they laterally will facilitate. That's one way to reach the whole world efficiently as possible. I'll skip forward to that. We're also interested in hiring an office to do this training or outreach. And in each of those countries, we're interested in these 6 things: academic specialists, telecommunications industry specialists, software designers, financiers, government officials, social movements, particularly involved in pollution or agricultural or rural problems, or urban as well. But anyway, moving on, we have finished already the centralized CM platform. It has 3 levels. I've already shown you already. Later on, we'd like to have a decentralized version, which would use something like IPFS or blockchain, that torrenting that would not be able to be stopped. It could be a decentralized structure, would require that. That would also help groups that don't have permanent internet access. They could download versions of it. There's a lot of mapping tools, for instance, in Ghana that I know of, that they don't rely on a permanent internet connection to even have a mapping tool. So there's ways to deal with the lack of electricity. There's ways to design platforms to deal with non-permanent internet connection that's already possible. So that's what I would love to have a team work with me. How do we roll it out for Rwanda? How do we roll it out for Ghana? And things like that. Anyway, within 3 years, I'd like to have completion of some of the training for people as well. But anyway, the impacts to communities, obviously local communities, 867 zones, all talking about the same rubric. The sense of the local in this project is worldwide. It's an innately transnational and global platform as well. I'll skip forward in the interest of time. But the impact is also a way to reach goal number 12, which is stable consumption and production patterns. And here is goal number 12. It should say responsible consumption and production. But when you reach this goal, I think it's kind of a keystone. And that one keystone, if you clean up the environment, you deal with what I call the social goals. Those are like no poverty, good health, education. You can do that from the platform. And the material goals, life on land, life on water. All those things can be done if you have a priority on SDG 12. And so if that's in the center, it reminds me of a bowling alley. If you hit the head pin, you're going to be able to knock down the other SDG goals and get a strike, right? From all that, I think the 3 kinds of material links now, just a few slides describe that. From all the research that I've done with my team, there's too many good ideas. I mean, a lot of people are very depressed about the future, but when I research this, it makes me very excited because there's too many good ideas, and just nobody's collated all these good ideas so far. And I think we're hardly waiting for innovation. Everything is here. It's already invented. We just have to coordinate it into systems. And it's a lack of applying innovations, a lack of awareness of all this. And also, of course, they're being blocked in some ways too. So this is how these links help us remove the blocks as well. So I'm going to say what is distinctive for a circular economy is optimizing those links. And we have to propose materially specific and organizationally specific views of a circular economy like a jigsaw puzzle. Skipping forward. And the names of those 3 kinds of links here are what I call marathon. I'll explain that in a minute. Triple win and waste-based. Those are the 3 things I noticed that facilitate links. And a marathon means materials that link multiple categories. It's not just a superconductor, but it's also potentially fodder or waste. Like chitosan can be used as semiconductor, but also it's a food product and bulk material for fodder. So marathon materials would fit multiple categories. Some materials we use only fit one category and do it well, but they have no links. So they're not really optimally designed to think about that. And a marathon, there's multiple categories again, but it's called marathon because they can go the distance and they have original Greek Olympic ideals of doing many things well. Like, modern Olympics are very specialized, right? There's one person who'll throw a javelin, but you had to run, wrestle, and throw the javelin and do a long run to be very good in the older Greek Olympics. Anyway, second kind of material links I call triple win. And this implies finding three things that materials do. And most people just design new materials for ecological virtue. And that means like a plastic straw into a paper straw as ecological virtue, but it's not functional. It's maybe cheaper, but it loses its functional importance. Like it doesn't really function better. So I'm saying if you really want to displace older bad materials, you have to be even better. You can't be worse than old materials. You have to be better materially on these three different ways. Has to be a functional improvement. And such triple win materials do exist, and we found a lot of them. They're better all around. The links are within themselves. They're simultaneously between better ecological, better social, economic, and better material functional outcomes. And a good example, infinitely recyclable PMMA plastics. Most plastics you can't infinitely recycle like that. Bad examples that will fail to displace, like ecologically virtuous recyclable paper straws that are cheap, yet not functional as straws, and even full of, now we know, PFA forever chemicals. You read about that. They tested them for, they're quite toxic, full of carcinogenic chemicals. Anyway, the third kind of link is waste-based. And waste-based means how do we link wastes from other categories into another category? And thus these materials will truly be unloved, some without links, into truly beneficial secondary uses by remediating, sequestering, or redesigning beforehand for these secondary uses. A good example, sequestration options of unloved toxics, like concretes go into geopolymers, flue waste, industrial dust waste from mining can go into concrete and sequester it. Makes very much stronger concrete. Also, sometimes the waste-based materials are loved, though. So there's unloved waste and there's loved waste. And the loved waste are these, like PPA, there's always a market for that because you always have an infinitely recyclable loop with certain materials. But we need to also think of the unloved wastes and how do we remove them from the environment. It's not good to build a totally green world while the oceans are full of plastic and the soil is full of everything else. So you have to really integrate, sequestration into, I think, the circular economy view. Sometimes these waste materials are materials we have zero interest in perpetuating, but we still need to think about how we can link them up to give them economic value to somebody take them out of the environment. And I'll just skip forward in the interest of time here. Anyway, here's an image of this. Studies find windmill turbines, despite more sustainable energy sources, they're being buried in landfills themselves because they're not materially recyclable. Most solar panels are incredibly toxic, and they don't get recycled very easily. And just the wrong way. And lithium batteries, less than 1% are recycled, according to this article from the Journal of Institute of Science. Some companies like Musk's, Tesla are trying to make closed loops, and that's possible. But right now, most lithium batteries are not recycled. Why is that? They change all the time. It's hard to set up a production cycle if the dynamics and scale, and pulling them apart is dangerous. These are transforming materials that explode or burn. So they're not really well designed for a circular world. Anyway, summary, all these points about marathon, triple win, waste-based materials together as criteria for better linkable materials. I have to think about the marathon materials as being more desired. We have to think about triple win contexts and think about incentivizing wastes, loved or unloved wastes into systems. And I think those are three what kind of links. And the four kinds of organizational links, I think, because most people think there's only going to be one organization, but I think empirically there's four ways people are organizing the circular economy. And these are four different ways. And these four definitions I will organize from ideal, number one, down to more pragmatic. And I'll show that from CE 1 through 4. It's not the 4 R's. It's not about behavior. It's about organization and a way to categorize and describe these different organizational goals of a circular economy. The first one, start over, Eden, right? But we're not there yet. You don't get, Rome isn't built in a day. You don't remediate the whole planet in one day. So we need to have more pragmatic things than getting there. But I'm defining this as fresh material choices, the best linked materials, and more virtuous cycles. But we're not there. So less ideal, but get more pragmatic. This is industrial ecology. This is eco-industrial parks. The Netherlands are very big on this originally, forcing businesses together that connect their waste pipes, because some, if they emit sulfuric acid, you may want to bottle that and sell it to another chemical manufacturer very close to that. So they're already building these closed loop systems, but notice it's toxic materials. But that's what I call CE2. So a lot of people thought about, industrial ecology, that's the term for this. So industrial ecology is CE2. CE3 is less ideal, but even more pragmatic. It's what Musk is doing within Tesla. We're going to do it, and Dell Computer is doing it. Dell Computer says they couldn't get any agreement with the laptop industry to redesign laptops, so they're going to do it. And they're going to have the same chassis for about 10 years, but they're going to have plug and play changes and improvements of the technology. And they'll accept their own waste back in the system. So that's what I call CE3. And you can see CE4, probably the most pragmatic, but the less ideal is what do we do with toxic things that we don't even want, these orphan materials. We still need to have a real good reason to pick them up. They could be toxic, but we need to put economic value in the toxic things, loved or unloved. And my point is the jigsaw is 2, 3, and 4 build the capacity in our society toward number 1. We don't get to number 1 right away, but these are the discrete pieces organizationally that help us merge towards CE1 style things. How can people support this? Share my other videos on this project. Look at my ResearchGate, Mark-Whitaker-2, or my LinkedIn, Mark Douglas Whitaker. Also, if you're interested in the circular economy, it still reads new today, but Barry Commoner's first really book on the circular economy was called The Closing Circle of 1971, republished in 2020. It still feels really new. I read it just a year ago, and I was shocked how new it felt. Another book that he was involved with was called Materials Matter Toward a Sustainable Materials Policy in 2001. And how can we do more action? You put me in contact with more organizations in different countries that want to accelerate the rollout. I've been quoted, it takes about $50,000 to streamline the current platform into Python. But nonetheless, other fun research, my research team with good materials as well. We've done about 50 materials out of the 130. I'd love to keep going with the team for a few more years. I actually have a volunteer team this summer, working on a few without pay. But anyway, what we can do from individuals, what you can do, that's what most people think. You must, what? Il faut cultiver notre jardin. We must, Voltaire's phrase, you must cultivate your own garden. That's good enough, but it doesn't change the fact that institutions are damaging your garden behind. So that's good to start with, but you can't end there, I think. And that means you need a systems perspective. You have to have some organizational connections. Support organizations that do this. This would be a good way to do it. Also, invest in circular economy businesses. There's some data that show green investment portfolio actually have slightly higher profit. And there's no real clear reason. Maybe they just manage everything better. That's one of the theories, that they just do everything better. And they don't have to cut corners so much. They're more efficient in whatever they do. If you work at a company, rearrange your product design for greater disassembly and recycling, things like that. Support all the 4 R's in your business. Recycle and renew and reuse within your own companies. Sell your company's waste to other organizations. There's got to be something here, even on our campus, old computers or something that just sitting around. It could be disassembled. The macro level, one thing that I really think is stopping us from getting there, we have subsidy networks built into bad materials that they don't even need to succeed in the market. They're just there. The tuna industry in the United States is like that. It's been unprofitable for 20 years, but each tuna is like $250,000. They buy politicians, they keep the subsidies going. Something like that destroyed the cod fishing. The subsidy network of fishing in Newfoundland in the 1960s to the 80s destroyed cod fishing. It wasn't overfishing. It was a subsidy of the fishermen and too many people on the water. And they used it as a welfare state instead of use it as a production itself. But anyway, encourage more innovations and market choices and find and support projects of the circular economy. And yet you can take a deeper historical view. And this is where I introduce Michel Bauwens today. that our lives are trending out of sync for years. And so we can work on this to put them more in sync. And Michel will be talking about that. But my other books, toward a bioregional state and ecological reformation, means changing of organizations just beyond the state. So, educational curricular changes are necessary, I think, to get sustainability. Economic organizations, financial, monetary diversity would help, I think. And also, but our history is a record of we get ecologically out of sync, and we do fight to get back in ecologically sync over and over. And Michel will call that the circulation of the commons, amongst other things. And he and I collaborated. He enjoyed the data in my book, Ecological Revolution, which I'm glad to hear from him, helped him think about this circularity of the commons itself. Anyway, also, despite our history is a record of a lot of environmental tragedies, the good news is our history is a record of environmental triumphs as well. And Michel will be talking about these periods in history that we are living in now that are involved in all of this. And that connects, of course, to his talk about the pulsation of the commons returning in history. And that's where we will now introduce Michel. Okay. And in the interest of time, I won't be showing anything else. You need to have something on the screen, Michel? Okay, all right.
All right. Just the cheat notes.
All right. What I want to do is leave a white screen behind you so it's easier. Yeah. May I read a biography about you?
Oh, yeah, right.
Okay. Michel Bauwens, founder of Peer-to-Peer Foundation, P2P Foundation from 2005, an observatory documenting working examples of commenting and peer production. He's the author or co-author of many books, the most recent being on the coming digital cultural transition, entitled P2P, A Commons Manifesto. Belgian citizen based in Thailand, Michel Bauwens was invited as a governmental consultant in 2014 to craft the whole state of Ecuador's transition plan to sustainable commons society. And he was consulted to make a similar governmental plan for the city of Ghent in 2017. He is now research coordinator for an emerging network nation initiative that is entirely governed through crypto governance mechanisms. In the last 3 years, he's advised SMART Co-op, Smart Co-op, a labor cooperative organizing new types of autonomous work sites for digitally aided peer production across 9 European countries. Personally, his own cosmo-local daily life combines living in traditional extended family setting in northern Thailand and his extensive connections to an estimated 34 million technomads, one word, technomads, who are building, huh? Okay. Okay. Not, maybe 500,000 of them. They know you, that's what you said. Who are building those new network nations of peer production worldwide. Okay. Thank you, Michel.
Thank you. Yeah. Right, so I think I'll stand here. I see the light is a bit better. So the last slide, well, thank you for inviting me and thank you for coming. So I'll just switch straight away to the story. So the way Mark ended his lecture was by talking about the pulsation of the commons, or the pulse of the commons, I think you called it. So let me start with that, with this idea. So if you read Mark's book, Ecological Revolutions, he talks about ancient China, medieval Japan, and post-Roman Europe. And so what Mark is showing is that elites tend to make bad choices which destroy the local environment, and that creates rebellious and revolutionary local ferment. That creates new alliances, new jurisdictional alliances. I think that's the language you use, and then that gives like a new swing to that particular civilization. I mean, you mentioned Japan, so let me just briefly, and you can correct me if I misremember what I read, but I thought it was very interesting. So you have like a whole century of civil war. All the warlords are fighting it out for a whole century. Eventually, the shogun emerges, and he disarms the peasants to create a state. He takes away the property of the Pure Land Buddhists, which basically organized the peasantry. 30–40% of the land was commons. And in the detail, like the way the land of these churches was managed was exactly like Ostrom describes it, like to the letter. with graduated sanctions and everything. So, so he takes back the land from the religious communities. He replaces Pure Land Buddhism with Zen, so to pacify the samurais who can't fight anymore. He makes like Louis XIV, he makes the aristocracy come to Kyoto every 2 years, and there can be no wheels, so they have to hire people. So like a very ingenious reorganization of Japanese society, which creates 2.5 centuries of thermodynamic balance. So this is very rare that a advanced state can stay 2.5 centuries within its regional planetary boundaries. This is in itself very interesting, and it's only because the gunboat came to show them that they couldn't survive this way, that they had a coup, and then the Meiji Revolution started. But so the key is that the nationalized land that was taken from Pure Land Buddhism was used as an imperial commons. Now, of course, that's not the pure commons, but the thing is the land was protected and managed for the common use, and that's how they could keep the wood production stable and not overuse the wood. So this is one good example. I'll give you another, because what the pulsation of the commons basically means is, that our societies are cyclic. So we have the foundation of a new society or new civilization. It emerges, it grows, it reaches a peak. In that period, the state and the market as extractive institutions work well. They create surpluses, they create more welfare for the people living in the core of that civilization. But then it reaches a peak, and if you go to Europe, you can see it every day. It reaches a peak, and so the state and the market are functioning worse and worse. The people are not getting their needs met, gradually less and less. That creates an incentive to create alternative self-organized local organizations, which recreate the commons. So just give you, I think, a fascinating example from Europe. So in the 5th century, Rome falls. It's a bit more complicated, but basically, that's kind of like the start. And so slave trade collapses, commerce collapses, especially after the 8th century when the Muslims take over the Mediterranean. And so you have this enormous, collapse of a complex civilization. What happens is, starting in the 5th century, the Benedictines create a craft agrarian monastic congregation, which functions as the instrument of expansion. So it restores agriculture in Italy, because they were getting food from Egypt before, in 50 years. Like in 50 years, these commons-based organizations based on collective property, you recreate the basis for local sustainability in Italy. In the 10th, 11th century, the same things happen in the Cistercians. And so basically you have the Teutonic order, which is military and wins over a territory, and then the Cistercians come in, and 70% of the land is developed by the Cistercians, which are also, they have forges, they're craftspeople as well, right? And so they create a surplus. And so there's a social revolution in 975, 1050, which you can read in Richard Moore, the first European revolution, which is absolutely fascinating. So basically, the monks with the farmers, organize demonstrations with the Virgin Mary up front, and they start confronting the feudals with their exploitative and extractive behaviors. And they come with a social compromise that has 3 rules: make love, not war. So the feudals promise to marry each other instead of fighting each other all the time. Primogeniture, so the oldest son gets everything, so no fighting within the family. And then this sounds negative, but the commoners can no longer hunt meat in the Lord's lands. This forces them to farm more, and this creates a surplus, right? So the Cistercians are a commons-based instrument of expansion for European civilization, which creates the conditions after this revolution for the cities to come back. And what happens in the cities? Another commons-based instrument of expansion, which is the guilds, right? But eventually that creates the conditions for a new civilizational surge. And the merchants will, and the king will win, and disband the guilds and disband the commons, right? So this is what I call the pulsation of the commons, right? You have these waves, and the commons never really disappear, but they weaken. And actually in Europe, that's where they almost disappear, because the bourgeois ideology is very much anti-commons. And this is different from traditional societies, never did that. Like even the worst feudal society respects the commons, right? I mean, an individual lord might, want to get the land, but as a system, the commons is a key of every pre-modern, pre-capitalist society. But even today, I would argue we are back in this, right? So I think the way that capitalism tries to solve this pulsation is by globalization. So in other words, you serially exhaust parts of the world, but the core doesn't feel it because, if Ukraine doesn't have grain, Russia will have it. And if Russia doesn't have it, Ethiopia will have it, right? So basically, until the moment that we are now in global overshoot. And so this introduces then the second concept, which is cosmo-local. And so the idea is that that we can no longer reestablish equilibrium at the local level. That's, I think, a very important level, right? So pulsation of the commons, local revolts, religious reforms, get a new type of civilization after a while. Within capitalism, it happened within the nation state, right? This is called Polanyi, a very great book, The Great Transformation, a history of the emergence, evolution of capitalism. And so he looks at the one cycle within capitalism, it's called the comparative cycles. They're like 50, 60-year cycles of high and low growth within capitalism. And he says in the emerging ascending phase, it's good for labor because they need workers. So it's the age of reforms, high productivity, better distribution of wealth. This reaches a peak where the suppliers, the capital no longer makes enough money. And that creates a counter-revolution. So the 70s, the crisis of the Keynesian ascending model leads to Reagan and Thatcher, the conservative counter-revolution. That leads to financialization, lower growth, but it's good for capital. And it ends in 2008 with a crisis of the bad, right? And the thing is, of course, that, and so the idea of Polanyi is lib-lab, the lib period, the lab period, more state, less state, more state, less state, more market, less market. And of course, the basic idea is that no longer works because we now have interstate, still geographic nation states. But the third factor has become transnational. So whenever you want to do any radical reform at the nation level, probably your banks will be empty within 100 days, right? So that's why all the parties in the West look the same. And I don't know who said it, but I think it's quite interesting. So he says, in the West, you can change parties, but you can't change policies. And in China, you can change the parties, but you can't change the policies, right? Like 20 people with a white thing, and it was done with the COVID policy. And so this means, and this is where cosmo-localism comes in, is that basically the rule of cosmo-localism is the following: it's everything that's heavy is local, and everything that's light is global and shared. So it's basically the open source model, which we already know from collaborative production of knowledge, Wikipedia, software, Linux, electronics, Arduino. This model is now transported into physical production, right? So local distributed manufacturing coupled with global intellectual, scientific, technical cooperation. So let me just give you a model because you come from Belgrade. So in Europe, we have it's called the multi-factory community. So these are craftspeople working with wood, plastics, 3D printing, metal. They basically look for old factories at the edges of the cities, which are cheap to rent. They run as co-ops and they do open source. And they have together, there are 120 of them, and there's one in Belgrade. They have an invisible factory. And the invisible factory is their commons. So in other words, they do their stuff locally, but their commons, they share their experiences and designs it's not a fully open commons, it's their commons, but it's still a commons. So so this is quite an interesting model. Maybe another example is the solar lamp in India, which I visited some time ago. So this is a solar lamp that people in villages can buy or receive from NGOs. It's based on an open design, so it's made in India, but the design is global and can be developed and shared anywhere. This allows 4 million students to do their homework in villages in India, which couldn't do it before. Then they added onto it a modular system to learn pretty much like the Khan Academy. And that allows 400,000 of these students to join university. So they do their study remotely first. And when they're good, they can then go to Mumbai, IIT, and join the normal university system. So this is a good example of a cosmo-local, right? Locally manufacturing these solar lamps, but the knowledge is free. And so why is this interesting? Because it moves from a paradigm of economies of scale, which is the capitalist paradigm, making more of a thing to make it cheaper, but using more energy and matter to do it, to economies of scope, doing more with the same. So in other words, any innovation within that network will benefit any node in that network, right? So any improvement of solar lamp becomes a collective property of all these local solar lamp manufacturers. So this is the model. So why is this quite radical in some way? Because it goes against the grain of our civilizational history. So let me explain that. I think we could, first of all, see civilization as a relationship between the city and agriculture. So climate change, 8,000 BC, swampification of the Middle East, drying up North Africa. So you either leave, but if you stay, you have to manage nature. And that's civilization, right? The organized management of natural forces in Mesopotamia, and then in China and India later on. And so the idea is very much a civilization is this relationship between agriculture and the city. So it's a geographic relationship. So what we're doing now with digital networks, and what you spoke about, Mark, is really we're adding something entirely new, which is the capacity to scale non-local cooperation. So I'll give an example. You talked about the network nation I work for. So these are my employers, like conflict of interest. I'm declaring it. So I'm functioning as their coordinator of their research. So this is a group of Chinese people, and they're they were involved in crowdfunding, crypto, all kinds of things, some of which is illegal now in China. So they feel frustrated, and so they are building a network of places around China. One is in Chiang Mai, that's why I'm involved with them. That basically they can function as tech nomads, digital nomads, and come in and out of China, and basically do their work and make money, but they can also go back to their families, and so it's not a political project per se. It's a project to hedge their own futures but they do this as a community, and they use crypto governance. Probably familiar with DAOs, distributed autonomous organizations. So we now have these automated company-like structures, but they're actually not company-like structures. So the big innovation is a shift from closed competing entities to open ecosystems, right? It was already done by open source. So if you collaborate for Linux or Wikipedia, anybody with the skills can contribute and nobody will tell you no. But there's a second layer of people controlling the quality of your work, and they will say yes or no. But there's no typical command structure. It's a contributory structure. And so one of the problems with open source was that a lot of people were not being paid. So you had, let's take Linux, you have 75% of Linux developers are paid either by corporations like IBM or Red Hat, or they're freelancing, but 25% were not paid. And why they're not paid? Well, because they do it to solve their problems, basically, and because it's open source, they can do it. But still, this was a serious problem, because as more and more people are doing this, right, more and more young developers, designers are, contributing to various open source projects. It's actually like the standard thing now. But they were not making a revenue model. So the people who were most contributing to this network were not necessarily getting paid. So that's where crypto comes in, and we can do a lot of critique of crypto, and I do that on occasion. It's Bitcoin is using up so much energy, so there's many things. It's libertarian. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we could say about it. Nevertheless, it has become the vehicle for this global labor aristocracy of digital nomads to self-organize their work. And that's very important. And to do that, they are create open ecosystems that are going to be useful for a project like yours, because they're creating, in my view, the infrastructure of this cosmo-local world, right? So an open ecosystem is a system, again, where any individual company or organization can come in or out because they're not paying each other. They don't have a hierarchical relationship, so they have to negotiate peer-to-peer relationships. And so usually the way they do it, it's pretty standard. So you have the contributory community, all the people contribute. Then you have a layer of value-added enterprises that create value on top of that commons, but they are codependent on that commons. And then they usually create a for-benefit association like the Wikimedia Foundation or Linux Foundation or Drupal Association, which manages the network, enables and empowers the collaboration to occur over time. They do licensing, they go to courts, they do training, certification, local conferences. And so what crypto did was create an economic system for that, right? So suddenly when you're in crypto, you can do an ICO, initial, what was it called, coin offering? Or the better one's called an initial community offering. So basically they generate these tokens, and they keep 40% for the workers. Give me any Marxist organization which is able to do that. There's not. Here it works, right? So they're keeping 40% of the income for the laboring part of the system. I think this is very interesting. And so this has created an economy for these open source projects. Oops, I'm actually not in the camera. And I think this is really interesting. So Network Nation is basically, a group of people who are starting to create as an entity, as a community that is translocal and transnational. And so what I see as one of the big challenges for the coming decades is how these two systems are going to work together, right? An existing geographically based governance system, and then a emerging translocal ecosystem. So this brings me to something even more important. I think it's possible to read history as a permanent struggle between state and market, since we have civilization. So this is, you can find this in the several books by Michael Hudson. I think one is called The Decline of the West, maybe, or The Decline of Civilization. The other one is called The Collapse of Antiquity. But he's basically saying the following, and I personally am quite convinced by the story. So you have the East Eurasian polarity, India, China, and they have always been state-centered. So imperium, an emperor, and he keeps the balance within society. So it's a harmony-based model with a lot of debt relief. So you look at, I don't know much about China, but in Mesopotamia, they had the Jubilee, the clean slate legislations. So every 49 years, debt holders got back their land, and the debts were declared null, right? So this was an extraordinary system to keep slavery very, very small within like the local slavery. They would still have slaves from the outside, but they kept the core of their civilizations, in balance to these measures, right? So then this is all Michael Hudson. So he says a big change occurred in Greece, where for the first time in history, the creditor class took power. So no more debt relief, no more clean slate legislation. And so what happened is a counter-revolution, right? So the Greek polis was a revolution against the creditor class. And so that created the Western model, which is maritime-based, trading-based, city-based, conflict-based. And up to now, this polarity has been functioning. And I don't know if it will shock anybody, but I'll say it anyway. I think Ukraine is a good example of where these two systems are not colliding. You know, whatever the merits of one side or the other, but you can see it's just empirically, you have Russia and China, state-centric, right? You can't be a capitalist in China and Russia without the approval of the government. And you, on the other side, you can't be a president of the US without the approval of capital, right? So these two systems are colliding. What I'm arguing is that what I'm describing is the third system. So in other words, we have now a third coordination system, which is not based on market pricing, which is not based on command, but is based on mutual coordination in open ecosystem. So I call this stigmergy, the language of the ants, bees and stuff, right? So they basically, and the queen is not giving commands, right? The queen is just laying eggs, basically. But the bees, they tell each other what to do by dancing, right? Just as if you go to Wikipedia, how do you know what to do? Well, it's an open system, so you just have to look and you say, oh, there's no article on Pure Land Buddhism. I can write it. Or the article on Pure Land Buddhism is wrong. I can correct it, right? So it's the signals that tell you what to do, and you have the freedom to do it or not. So this is the mutual coordination system that I think is emerging through open source and through crypto. Mixed with other things, right? So crypto is very much market mixed. And so this is why it's a bit controversial, because there's a very strong libertarian part to it. But the way I see it, it's a class thing. So socialism is the ideology of labor. You know, people working together in big factories, and they know that they can't win without fighting together. Libertarianism, in its left and right versions, is the ideology of independent workers, craft workers, smallholders, small business people. They want freedom. They hate the state and big business, right? So I think this is the social basis for this ideological reality. So I'm slowly coming to the end. I just want to say one more thing about the contributory logic of what I'm talking about. So what does that mean? So basically, what is the system we have today, right? In the 17th century, we had a big debate in Europe between the mercantilists, who still believed that value came largely from land, the surplus of land, and the industrialists. And the industrialists won. And basically, that meant that the labor value of theory won, right? So basically, because even, Smith and what's the other one? Ricardo, they were not Marxists, but they actually agreed on the labor team, right? So value comes by applying human labor and creating scarce commodities. Okay, now we could say, you can add matter and energy prices to it, and so okay, you have to buy things and then you sell them at a higher price, create surplus. Simplifying. So then we tax that, and that's the state, and the state then redistributes. I think this is pretty much the Korean model is the global model. But so in other words, we cannot do anything generative. We cannot fund and finance anything generative directly. We have to get it extracted first, then tax it, and only then can we fund, generative, non-profit generating activities, right? The contributory system is different. I would argue that if you look at open source and crypto, is where's the value come from? From all the people contributing to the common. So take Linux. The value of Linux is not created by the 75% people who are paid by IBM and Red Hat. No. It's created by the 100% of all the people who contribute to the common pool. And only then can you create value-added services. So this is, for me, a new value system, right? And I think that civilizational transitions are not just like, this is not an evolutionary story like, okay, the Romans had slavery and the Christians abolished slavery. And this is these are revolutions. In other words, you have a slaveholder economy where work is pejorative, and it's replaced by people who say we have to pray and work. And work is an expression of our divine collaboration to make a better world, right? This was a revolution. Similarly, I think today we're in for a big value revolution because the old way is no longer really functioning, and so this is, of course, maybe I'm coming slowly to your point of view, is that so far everything you're trying to do is actually making the market responsible for regeneration, right? I mean, carbon markets. So we're all thinking that the market is going to solve the ecological issue. I'm very skeptical. I think it's the commons of it. And historically, that was the case. So historically, states and markets have always overused their local ecologies. And that's what I learned from you. It's never been any different. It's just the way it is. And then the commons are the ones restoring, maintaining the health of the ecology. So the way I think about this is that we have to embed markets and states, not abolish them, but embed them in a larger structure that is actually common-centric. So this is, open to debate, of course. And so I'll end with this by saying that, so I'm thinking about magisterial of the commons. So I think there's a commons gap at the global scale. So we have international governments, we have transnational capital. What we don't have is intercivic, productive, translocal associations that can protect human and non-human communities and life resources. And so in other words, that's the way I see it for the future. Okay, so how is this related to circular economy? I have a few arguments. So first of all, localization, cosmo-local. Why localization? Because localization means that we are saving 2/3 of matter and energy. We are now spending 2 or 3 times as much on moving things and on making things. So that's my first argument. If we relocalize, we are actually automatically, I'm not saying we can do everything, but I think a large part of this potential can be realized. So that's first. Localization in itself allows us to keep complex modern systems at a dramatically lower. So I'm not talking about going back to the land, right, and giving up technology. I'm talking about technology-rich localization, but non-polluting. So the Arduino, for example, is it allows farmers to manage their agricultural production with an open source hardware, right? So they're the same level of big multinational, but they're using a open and free hardware platform. Mutualization is the next step. Mutualization is, so I did this report in Ghent, and sorry, I think half of the time I'm just not there, but you can hear my voice. So in Ghent, there was a lot of car share. So not Uber. So Uber is a market-based alternative. It forces the drivers to compete with each other to be in the right place at the right time. So it actually creates more pollution than taxis. On the other hand, if you do a car sharing agreement in a block. So yesterday, 2 days ago, I visited a housing co-op called We Stay in Korea, and 40% lower rent and lifelong security for your apartment, childcare, libraries, movies, and everything, really nice. They also have spaces. This is inspired by Canada for car share. One shared car can replace 9 to 13 private cars, right? So there's a movement now, it's called factor 20 reduction. And they're looking at mutualization to drastically reduce our use of materials. So this is playing right in your hands. And so another thing that I might briefly mention is that accounting systems are being changed in these ecosystems. So for example, the first tablet is in Sumer, right? And it's basically grain and slaves being traded, and that's why they needed writing, not to say I love you, but to actually count the number of slaves and going one way or another. So this is the invention of the state. right? An independent institutions from the people that eventually becomes coercive to the people. Then in the 14th, 15th century, Lucio Paci, a Franciscan monk invents double entry book accounting. And that really is the invention of captains, commercial captains. But the problem is you can only see what's happening in your closed entity, right? More profit, more capital, less, but you have no idea of the impact. So what is happening in this crypto system is, first of all, contributory accounting. So inventing systems so that this 20% can also be paid, right? Second, flow accounting. This is called REA, resources, events, agents, and no double entry. But every transaction is like, what resource is it? What happens with that resource, the event, and who are the agents involved. So you have a complete and permanent 3D picture of all the transactions within an ecosystem. So suddenly you can see the environment, social and ecological environment. Then the third thing is thermodynamic accounting. There's now sophisticated projects, and two Chinese provinces are experimenting with it, of not looking at money flow, but at matter and energy flow. This is exactly what you're doing, but more collective, right? More institutional. So that, but any commercial entity can potentially then see, what it's doing. And so the idea of one project called r30.org is global thresholds and allocation. So there's a scientific group. They keep a Mendeleev table of all the resources. So again, very similar to what you're doing. And then, of course, this is the political difficulty. How do we make agreements about who can use what, right? This is, so generally speaking, what happens is, and maybe we can avoid it this time, but this is generally what happens. We go to war, and then we decide, oh no, that's not a good way to deal with this. And then we create new infrastructures of collaboration, right? So that's how we got the welfare state and all of that. So I think if we can't manage to make agreements, it will eventually come, because otherwise we'll just be having warfare over more and more scarce resources. So eventually I think we'll have this. And yeah, so this is another point, I think. Okay, I don't know if you heard about, and I'll close with this, perma-circularity. This is Christian Ansperger. I think it's a very useful idea, because what's wrong today with ESG and many things is it's all about relative progress, right? So you can say as a corporation, oh, I'm making progress. Well, actually, all of you together, you're still destroying the planet, right? So who cares, right? It's better than nothing, but this is not solving any issue. We need actually absolute figures, like how much copper is there, and what's the negative threshold beyond which the whole system collapses, right? So this is global thresholds and okay, this is what it's doing. And so perma-circularity is the very simple idea that if we more than 1% growth a year, we're exponential. So like 1% is already like a hard win. Like, so keeping circularity with maximum 1% augmentation per year. So it's not just enough to have circularity, you really have to think about long term. Okay, I'll stop here. Thank you for listening to me. I had a lot of stuff to condense in a short time, but I hope you get the swing of the approach, right? It's quite unusual, but if you are like more in the networks, you will see that this is actually something that is already happening, talked about, written about. It's just not really percolating to the existing mainstream system. Thank you.
I have first a comment on your stuff, and then for Michel's piece, because I'm very as well. The whole framework of the commodity ecology model is based on a theory which addresses the practical use and the effective management of waste material that is linked to SDG 12. What I perceive to be missing in the model as of now, and it's not your fault, is the fact that there's an absence of a business plan which outlines the what's in it for me versus the what's in it for us with respect to the gradual implementation of it in real time, all the time, that is scalable, integratable, and adaptable to the specific needs of those stakeholders. Once that's answered, I think it will come full circle with respect to people realizing the exact value of the value that you're trying to propose. So that's what I would say respectfully is missing is the business plan.
Right.
Once that's seen, I think corporate agents, quasi-government agencies will automatically connect to it because this is about a sharing of power and knowledge and also a relinquishing of power and knowledge.
Mhm.
And that is most quantitatively managed by a business model moving forward. Because ultimately, your stakeholders, they've got to be also in a macro, meso, and a micro perspective to get the very best of each section. And under the macro perspective is the exact strategic plan from the government side and the business plan from the commercial people who are handling those waste materials that you eventually want to efficiently manage. So that's my just comment on that.
Yeah, thank you. There's slides about it, and as you recommended, I'm working on doing a business plan, separate slide deck.
Right.
But also, it's also, I guess, part of the business plan would be, telling corporations that your wastes are valuable. I mean, it's also like, you should not see that as something negative, but find some way to monetize that. That would be one way to bring a collaborative aspect to it. But also, I noticed one thing, I feel like people are talking past it because what this is sort of, this is a new coordination, creating value by the collaboration. And your discussion, as I still look for funding and capital from the extractive network, I have to still make an argument for how big companies are going to get their own piece of that pie to build out this infrastructure, which is more collaborative. Yeah. Yeah.
There's maybe a dozen cities in Europe that are trying this out. It's called public ledgers. Yeah, I think this would fit in with them. So the idea is the following. So there is a community land trust in France called Dept, and they buy up land because it's very expensive, and they rent it to biological organic farms. So they have a report that shows that they're saving the French state and its depollution agencies 350 million euro a year. There are now no mechanisms to redistribute it. So if you would have a public ledger, and this can be applied to your system as well, where every citizen alone or in group or entity or NGO, no matter, can actually lodge its contributions, right? Its positive impacts. And there's P2P verification, there's institutional verification. This can be tokenized. And this can be funded partly by public funds who say this is a priority for the survival of our society, so we support people doing this. But also companies who are, having negative impacts, right? They can say, well, this is a bit like carbon markets, but it doesn't function like a market. There's no, but so companies that benefit from this can say, yeah, we also contribute. For example, IBM is putting 10% of its budgets into open source because it saves 90% of infrastructural costs internally. So it's a positive feedback. They only give 10%, but they get the work from everybody to their benefit. So this kind of system, I think, would be radically revolutionary because it doesn't require extraction first. Like you can have
I've never heard that. You're correct.
So it would fit right in your system if you would think like, maybe we can incentivize, by tokenizing.
And that's part of a business plan I haven't thought about. Mostly I thought about business plan is, premium services. And then on top of that, people who want their products to actually be shown, they would pay more. And that's one way that there's a platform business plan. And then there's all the incentives, I think, for all businesses, like here's a place you can come to get rid of your waste cheaper and find collaborations to do that. So it's like their internal accounting could be aided by such a project too. I haven't thought about it. Oh, it's hit a small role. The wheel. Korea keeps telling Michel that every 3 moments there's a new natural disaster that he has to respond to. That doesn't happen in Thailand. We should tell them it's caused a disaster by having these constant communications. Yeah, I wanted to say one thing. Sorry, glad you're okay. I saw you roll. I wasn't too worried because I saw you rolling. But one relationship I thought would be good to tease out again. You said at the very beginning, you talked about the rise of the Benedictines, Cistercians, and these mutualizations. They're creating value. They're creating an economy. And what you're talking about with all these digital technomads, they're creating. It's like the early Benedictines. It's like the first few Benedictine zones are being. You're dealing with one of them. In other conversations, he said he was in Montenegro a few months ago for a conference which coordinated about 15 different network nations. So they all talked about how they were organizing this. So I mean, these are all these different, for the old European analogy, these are all productive monastic institutions, all technocrats that are trying to find institutions to how they're going to make collective value across cyberspace and in particular real life. And that's exactly what they were doing. They were coming together mutually in the Benedictines or Cistercians and urban zones to create surplus. And that's what they want, a regular way to coordinate digitally that they're not being paid. And once they do that, that trust network is going to build surplus. And so what you're describing is not really an escape from the market, but it's the foundation for the markets that are collapsing. It's a new kind of market that will regenerate. Is that fair?
Yeah. So, the commons are not empty. So
Yeah.
the sister senses were creating the surplus, and that surplus created the market.
But you're
actually the market towns first developed around the monastic place.
And that's
where.
But our modern, like you said, our modern discourses are arguing like commons is somehow anti-market because we come out of a society that intentionally destroyed those institutions like 200 years ago.
I think markets are.
Can I ask
Yeah.
something to listen?
Yeah.
I've been reading about the Austrians network.
Eleanor Austria.
Yeah, and so one of the things that she has is a
Graduated sanctions.
Yes. So how would that you incorporate into your system?
Well, it's basically, so how do you protect the common values from private? So an important thing to say is that normally in digital networks, they cannot be overused, but on the contrary. So Ostrom is talking about rival goods like land and agriculture. In the digital, we have anti-rival or non-rival. So the more people use an open network, the better for the network. But there's still many ways that you can, like the trolling and there's a lot of things you can imagine. So basically, so they come up with these. Yeah, they do come up with these kinds of
People
things.
are inventive.
Yeah, very much so.
Demented and inventive.
How did this system can police itself? That's my question.
Okay, I don't know enough. In my particular case, I can only tell you the positive things, but I'm not sure yet about how to deal with the negative things.
Let's talk about.
But I'll give you an example of what they're doing. So, in order to join them, you buy an NFT, just like your membership, and you come to Chiang Mai or you go to Turkey and we get a 1 week onboarding. Teaching you basically the rules of the community and how it works, what you can do. From that moment on, if you join, then all your contributions will give you tokens, will give you governance tokens. And so it's designed as an anti-oligarchic governance system because actually Bitcoin is very concentrated already. They have the whales, as they call them, like 12 people own at least 50% of the Bitcoin. So, it doesn't really work as the libertarians would like it. But so what they're doing, because they believe in it, right? They believe in crypto. They see this as an utopian project as well, which is why they continue to do it even when they lose 2/3 of their value. This thing is not dying because it's a belief system, right? We can discuss whether it's valid or not, but
That holds it together, regardless.
yeah, it holds it together, right? And so basically, they design this anti-oligarchic governance, but it's called quadratic voting. There's different systems, and I've looked at those, but I haven't looked really at their punishments. I'm not aware what they're doing.
I wanted to give me a different example, which was more easy to understand. This community that you told me is sold, that you buy in, we live together. How is it
We
called?
stayed.
We
so-
stay.
Yeah. So let's say I buy a share, but 3 years from now, I start to abuse it? Is there a way, let's say,
Yeah, they have.
so they developed a way to protect the,
They have a committee and they have like rules of behavior.
so I can be expelled from.
You could be expelled.
That's not a graduated punishment, right? Like, that person
No,
has-
yes,
That's
because
sort
you
of
get,
warnings
you
and
get
then,
warnings first and eventually, so they won't immediately,
Three strikes and you're out.
yeah, it's things like that, yeah, it's things like
you're
that.
trying to figure out the window of the department.
Part of it, one last thing.
Yeah.
Part of the government that the governance we have is like police, right?
Right.
That we waive our rights, of policing the society to the government, right? I don't decide who's guilty or not, it's the police or whatever judicial system. And here I'm part of that decision. That's a big deal.
Yeah, that's another side, of course, you are a small community, everybody's looking at you, you're looking at everyone, right, so that's.
Because there is
That's
this whole
the-
theory that, how would I say? Not humanitarian, but that not selfish behavior is actually started in the small tribes where your value goes up if you're not selfish.
Yeah.
So you're not selfish because there is a gene of that selfishness. We all have selfish gene, but that developed as you are person understanding a community.
This would be the case, but, you know, with the saving grace, I would say it's
Yeah.
only about housing. So, you know, they're not interfering with what job you want to do, what belief you have. It's just like, you live there, so, okay, there are rules.
But there are many rules in the housing.
Yeah, I don't know if there are more rules than in a private community, because, you know, you go to like a private housing condo, there's many rules as well, right? So I don't know if there are more, but, and I would think that the fact that there's a community spirit does exactly what you say, is that actually people behave better almost automatically, right?
But I mean,
So-
but they share cars and they share daycare and let's say you have the 4 children, I have 1, so that's kind of like,
Yeah.
even, right?
I believe, this is a matter of how we interpret collectivity versus individualism and the actual legitimacy and continuation of the government powers involved. So if every 4 years the policies change towards favor or non-favor of a collective community, you're talking about differences in the taxes they're liable for, whether or not those value-added services are really value-added or not. And the incentives to stay, whether or not that current government is actually wanting to relinquish its power so that this thing could look better than the power itself. So that's the problem, because if you look at, for example, Clausewitz, he says that the best management of war, it's not by the people, it's not by the army, because they're all interested in, 1, an emotional revenge. Number 2, a continuation of war. It's really up to the statesmen who, in a sense, are evil themselves, but at the most part, more able to, merge all the differences in order for some collective thing to happen, in order for a nation to survive.
Right.
Now, I definitely would love to see that model in a state where there's no friction of existing powers, so that it can have enough moment to individualize and prove itself as a successful model. But what I think, in a cynical sense, as you can see in the government right now, if we're reading the newspaper, there's a lot of weird things going on. And I don't know what's gonna happen next week.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm saying.
No, it lives in a political world
Yeah.
but, you know, the co-ops movement in Europe was very strong in a very hostile environment, so, you know, it depends.
Yeah, I like it. I like
The
it.
dynamic is, if we're talking about the United States as the analogy, the point that I see in history is you almost don't have to worry about that because this is the death throes of those systems. And by default, what Michel is talking about, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on group, that's institutionally it comes about because it's picking up the pieces. And what will happen is not a relinquishing of power, but a collapse and a reflowering without the opposition. And right now there's the opposition. And I think most societies are full of that opposition of state, market, and like regionality. But as these groups get more violent and powerful, they lose legitimacy, but they lose capacities to keep people under them, and they lose the ability to stop people. And that's what worries me. I'm not saying this is like 1,000 flowers blooming. I mean, we're dealing with systemic unrest, and it may, create more openings for regionality. But I think regions still need to collaborate, and that's the cosmo-local and this idea of like we have to piece together these different groups, or they will all fight each other too. And that's what I see. I don't see this as like a utopia coming. I see this as a terrible period
So
where we need to find coordination between regions.
I understand.
Yeah.
And I understand Michelle as well.
Yeah.
Because we're in the same academic community. But give that to the actual citizen who just wants to go and buy bread.
Right.
And eat food. We've got to explain that and put the parameters and conditions in the environment
There's a
available.
tenfold increase in urban commons in 10 years. So it's, I would say, probably affects like 3% of the population on average.
Yeah.
But there's a report on Catalonia, and there, it goes up to 70% of the people lending money to neighbors. So depending on how you look at it, people are doing it because they have to.
I imagine some regions
If you're a young person today, you can't buy a house. You can't buy a house. So what do you do?
I love that. If it happened in an ideal state, like for instance, in Korea, they have something called Dept,
Go ahead,
where
Suzanne.
people contribute money and then after a certain amount of time, they pick the person to be given the accumulated money.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of like.
Rotating savings and.
I love that spirit, but the thing is, even in those communities, there's conflict.
Of course.
And so what I'm saying is that it'll never go away. So it's up to the people who are in charge of the municipal powers to combine and believe in what you're trying to do.
It makes a difference. The scale of this project depends to a certain degree on.
Also, an example of that collaboration, like you're working with the mayor, ex-mayor of Ghent.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a sponsored
Yeah, no,
Commons
I-
plan of how do you do these different infrastructures.
And it's got a couple of success.
Right.
uh,
Please don't look at me, but look at Michel's P2P or P2P Foundation, which is his, as he said, observatory of working examples since 2005, where he's not just booster, he's saying these work, these don't work. So it's a very useful archive of 25,000 different pages at this point.
I enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, everyone. I will turn off the camera.
Enjoyed it.
Yeah.